So I'd like to hand over the comfy settees to Carlo now, where you're going to be looking a little bit around issues around education and that amazing nexus between educational establishments developing work in this area and the cities within which they're in. So Carlo, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Peter.
The seat is warm.
Wonderful. Can we have the next slide? And Sigbritt and Richard, would you like to join me here? Great. Great. Great, so we have it. All right, so we'll start now looking at actually innovation and the role of universities into how innovation is spreading out in cities. So delighted to have here on the panel Sigbritt Karlsson, who's the president of KTH, and Richard Lester, who's the associate provost here at MIT. And what we look at today is a couple of things. The first thing is actually how research in this time we're talking about of IoT, of internet becoming Internet of Things, internet entering physical space. So research is actually entering the space of the city. So the city is more and more present inside the university. And at the same time, the university is more and more present inside the city. And we see it here in Cambridge with what happens at MIT, actually creating an increasing number of startups and companies that change the ecosystem of the whole city. So those are topics we will discuss in this panel. And we will do this and also launch at the end officially the collaboration between KTH at MIT, the Senseable Stockholm lab that is starting today. So I wanted to start with this and ask both of you, in this new condition where the city became more and more present as a testbed for the research we do at the university, how should technical universities such as MIT and KTH change and adjust?
Well, maybe I can start. So I think the idea that the boundaries between the university and its surroundings are porous is not new, and the notion of an ivory tower is one that never really applied to a place like MIT and probably not to a university like KTH either. The boundaries have always been very open, but I think they're getting more and more open, and that's for a number of reasons. One is, as you mentioned, Carlo, the extent to which our universities are now engaged in their local and regional economies is probably quite a bit greater than it was before. It's certainly true of MIT. If we look at the rate at which new economic activity is being generated here, it's certainly on the up. But that's not the only way in which the boundary is becoming more porous. And I think the other point that you make, Carlo, is very, very important in that the surroundings of our institutions are themselves becoming labs which we work in and on. And so the idea that there are labs in the campus and then something else outside the boundaries of the campus is no longer the way things are. We have labs on both sides of the boundary, and I think that may be something that we want to explore a little more in this conversation.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. This morning we heard from Anna, from the mayor of Stockholm, how Stockholm is kind of unicorn city, is the second highest density of unicorns in the world after Silicon Valley. And also Sigbritt, what is the relation, the role that KTH is playing in the Stockholm ecosystem?
I would like to start to say that KTH is close to 200 years. It was started during the industrialization of Sweden. So by necessity, there was a large need for engineers. Today, we examine close to 30% of all engineers in Sweden. So we are still really a necessity for the business, but also for the public society. More and more, the society benefits of higher education of universities are asked for. And in that respect, this new collaboration is really manifesting this, that we need to prove that we can give something back to society and to business. At least that is the situation in Sweden, where at least KTH is funded by taxpayer money. So it's important that we prove that we give back to society. And this new collaboration is really unique because it's not the first time that we collaborate with MIT. There is a lot of research going on between MIT and KTH. But it's a unique collaboration from the perspective that we now join forces in this area, Senseable City Lab, and use Stockholm, the city of Stockholm, as a test bed. And the city of Stockholm will put a list of issues that they want to have help with to resolve some difficult future issues for the city of Stockholm, which they need because they will develop the future of Stockholm. So that's context.
Great. So the city more and more is both the container and the content of a lot of the things we do within the university. Well, when we look at one of those two aspects, the aspect of the startup, I always look at that in a positive way. In a positive way is that, like, maybe 10, 20 years ago, a lot of people would graduate from MIT or Harvard or KTH, and they want to go, and at least here in this country, will go on to go and work on Wall Street or in finance. And today you see more and more people actually wanting to do a startup and do something else that's more based on a bottom-up innovation ecosystem. I always thought that was a positive thing. And then recently I saw an article by Negropontes, who's a colleague here at MIT. And Nicholas was looking at this from the other side and actually seeing this as something quite negative, saying, well, yes, but there's also a lot of the people who in the past would have wanted to go and solve really the deep, key, important problems in theoretical physics, in other disciplines. And now what do? They just go outside and do an app or something like this. So just work in this space, and we miss many opportunities in tackling the very important problems. How do you see that?
Well, I think there are pros and cons. I mean, my background, as you know, Carlo, is nuclear science and engineering. And I've been here a long time. I've been teaching here many, many years. And for most of that period, our students, to the extent that they stayed in the field, really had very few options. And the options in terms of professional careers were all with large, should I say it, sometimes quite unimaginative companies. And then within the last decade, it became evident to our students that, well, they actually had other options. And some of those options involved creating their own new companies and exercising, I think, without question, opportunities to be a lot more creative and do more interesting things than they might otherwise have had. So I think in my field, in many other fields, the opportunities that have emerged in the last 10, 20 years to create new businesses around one's research really is a good thing. But on the other hand, I think the point that you raise is a very important one. I think today we keep track of these numbers. I think about 20% of our graduates say that they intend, I don't know whether it actually comes to fruition, but they say that they intend to start a new company as the first thing they do after they've graduated. 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, that number was about 4%. So it's definitely a strong trend, and as I said, I think it's generally a very positive trend. But I do think that we run the risk in our signaling to the extent that signals by faculty have any impact, I'm not sure whether they do or they don't, but to the extent that they have an impact, I think we may run the risk of understating the value of working hard on a fundamental problem, which is what many of us, most of us, I suppose, on the faculty are doing. And I think that to the extent that we're creating incentives not to do that, yes, I think there are some downsides.
Yeah. Sigbritt, what about your view from, unicorn city, Stockholm?
Yeah, Stockholm is a hub for innovation and tech startups. And that means also that our students, when they come, they are interested to pursue their own businesses and take care of the ideas. But one must realize that comes from somewhere. And we try to list some factors that, in fact, have given Stockholm this position. And one thing is that we have a very highly developed welfare system, which means that you can take a risk once you're examined as an engineer and start and think about things that you, if you are in another system, maybe you don't like to take that risk. Another factor for KTH and for whole Sweden university system is that we have something called professor's privilege or teacher privilege. That means that the teacher, the professor, owns their own invention.
I like this, Richard. Maybe we could bring him to MIT.
Yeah, it has been discussed once in a while, but I'm looking at Anna here in the
Professor Privilege, all my colleagues I see in the audience, so remember this. We'll get back to Richard.
I don't think the Swedish politician, thinks that it is a prioritized subject to take away. Anyway, we think that has given us some benefits with the professors and the teachers that comes with their ideas and continue with and develop the ideas. In addition, I think it's about 25 years or so where the public funding for innovation system has increased largely in Sweden. And at KTH, we developed the Innovation Office 2007, because then the government, the party that was leading Sweden at that time, said that there should be 4 or 5 innovation offices, and one of those were placed at KTH. And over this 12 years or something, it has really evolved, and we have around 300 ideas that goes into the system, and presently I think it's something 220 companies that have started through ideas from students or professors at KTH. So it's really successful, but it's public spending that has made this happen. On the other hand, the downside, I would agree that some of the research done at KTH by the research are fundamental. And they are not useful here and now, but maybe in 10, 15, 30 years ahead, these ideas will also give useful in the context of creating a business.
Yeah.
So we need to take care of both these things.
Yeah, and I mean, all of this seems very exciting, and we are talking about KTH and MIT. This morning we had on the mayor's panel, we also the panel on Monrovia, and actually brought to the table a whole other range of issues. So the question is, if you take all of this, how do we scale it up, for instance, to the global south? I mean, do we need to change the model of higher education? Somehow, the model we're talking about is a model that started around 1,000 years ago in Bologna, in Oxbridge, then later, and we're still based on that model. But the model we also know, the model we're in is also very, very expensive. How can it scale up on the global south, especially with the cost it has for, in the United States or in Sweden, even if covered by the government? Do we need to look at a different way to tackle these issues in order to really make a difference, not only for the elite, but actually for the whole planet?
So this is a really tough question for higher education, I think, and it's hard for us to figure out how to scale what we do. many of us, I think many of the faculty at a place like MIT, I'm sure this is true at KTH, look for ways to increase the scale of impact of what they're doing. And sometimes that is, that happens in a very natural way if they're engaged in certain kinds of innovations. But when it comes to education, it's, to give an example, you know, MIT has played a role in a number of different countries over the last 10 years or 20 years, helping the creation of new universities. We've done this in Singapore, in Abu Dhabi, in Russia, just outside Moscow, and 2 or 3 other places. And the goal in each of these activities has been to try to help a government build a new educational institution that has some resemblance to MIT. But these are very big projects. They take, obviously, a decade or more. There might be a couple of hundred faculty involved over that period. We only have 1,000 faculty. So it's really hard to see how that mechanism for scaling can really get beyond these sort of small numbers. And yet we want, and you see the enormous demand, burgeoning demand for higher education services around the world. We want to contribute to that. So how can we do that? One way we can do it, obviously, is through digital learning and digital platforms that we have and that others have and that we collaborate with others on are helping in that regard. But there's nothing that can really substitute in higher education of the type that we do, that KTH does, where it's all about the interactions between individual students and faculty. There's really nothing that can substitute for that when we talk about digital learning. So I think this is a real challenge that we haven't figured out. Of course, we do blended learning and things of that kind. But if we could figure out how to scale, really scale what we do at these higher education institutions, I think that's almost the holy grail of our field. We haven't cracked it yet.
Yeah, it seems you know, the scaling, you know, with the MIT class a couple of weeks ago, we were in Zhengzhou in China, a city that not many people know. Well, it's a city of 10 million people, and actually they graduate around 50,000 people every year, just in the city. And so clearly, you know, the scale is something, you know, when you look at the 1,000 faculty we have here, you know, the impact that can be had is very limited unless we can really find a new way to do it. On the digital and physical side, on MOOCs, you know, digital education, and how that can expand the reach of KTH. How do you see that, Sigbritt?
Presently, we have around, I think, 16 or 18 so-called MOOCs, which is, in fact, the largest number of the Swedish universities. That's one way of reaching, of course, but I see rather the incoming students and outgoing students, and also incoming faculty and outgoing faculty as the way to scale. We have educated over the years a lot of students coming from Asia and all over the world, I would say. They go back and bring with them the memory and the experience from Stockholm and from Sweden. And they might end up working for Swedish companies in their home country. So that's one way of scaling, using the students, giving them the very good experience of staying and educating at KTH.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically using both MOOCs, but also the physical presence of the students as a way to create this. And maybe the city itself, you know, if you think about also continuous education, the city itself, you know, with the presence of the students could become a way to combine the digital and physical learning and to scale it up. But that's probably something to, for for a follow-up discussion. Going back to some of how the impact of the city on, or the university on the city, like what we've seen here in Cambridge, how do you see that relationship evolving, with the mayor and so on, given that that impact is growing more and more with the spillover on the physical space?
Yeah. So I think for the visitors, perhaps there are a number of visitors here, what people see mostly, I think, when they visit Cambridge and the greater Boston area in this regard is the life sciences cluster, which really is a remarkable thing that has happened. Just a few numbers. I think at this point there's almost 1,000 biotech enterprises operating in the greater Boston area, and just within a mile of where we are now, there are more than 100 biotech life sciences companies. And one of the questions that people often ask is, well, how did that happen? It wasn't luck, but it wasn't planned either. And I think we could talk a lot about how it happened. To me, one of the most important drivers, one of the most important reasons why it happened was that we had a federal government, well, maybe we still have one, but we had one that was willing to invest over a period of many decades in fundamental research in life sciences. We had universities like MIT and Harvard and BU, and we had some of the greatest teaching hospitals. We had a scientific revolution that happened during this period, which was really a very important part of this whole story. We had a little extra space around this neighborhood that wasn't being used for much, similarly in the Longwood region. So we had a number of things that were in place that led to what we see today. Will it continue? I think that what is so important about this region is, and in particular, the relationship between the university and the region, the university and our area, is that this is about we are periodically engaged in creating new industries. This isn't only about creating new companies. This is about actually creating new industries, and that happens relatively often here. And the only reason that that can happen, in my view, is because of the extraordinarily powerful fundamental research infrastructure that we have. You can have many good, constructive collaborations between universities and cities that don't involve the creation of new industries, but do involve the creation of new companies. But the new industry creation is something that happens only if there is a strong foundation of fundamental research.
Great. I was looking through the questions that are coming in through the online system. I got one a bit more technical for you. Sigbritt, is how do you see the impact of declining Pisa score in Sweden as a lead indicator on Stockholm's position as a leading innovation hub?
Okay, and that was both a difficult but also for me a question that I have reflected on myself. The going down in the Pisa has a lot to do, according to what I think, that Sweden has taken on board a lot of new immigrants coming to Sweden. We have 2015, we took roughly 10% of the inhabitants of Sweden came as newcomers. Yeah. That means that in school we can have 25 different languages at the same time. And of course the task for the teachers to take on board these pupils that comes from all around the world. Some come with really bad experience from war and things like that, and try to give a good education. That is an enormous, difficult task. So if we had a look at the Pisa results, grouping them according to people that have been living for a long time in Sweden and people having recently come, I would think that we will have some quite different results. Maybe that is not politically correct to say it like that, but that is the fact. The difficult situation in the classroom is one of the factors behind this. And of course, we are worried that this will affect students coming to the universities. So far, we have managed really well. At the same time, the innovation hub and the reason why people are doing a lot of innovation still is many see the opportunities in Sweden to start something without education. So that is also some of the good innovation is coming from people that has not gone to university. So there is a climate for this and the welfare system.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I was looking at also a lot of the comments, really, a lot of them deal with this kind of scaling up. And if I had to summarize a lot of what I'm seeing here and what was discussed is that somehow what we've been talking about all day about cities, about the big disruption in cities that produced by new technologies, by urban intelligence, as we have been seeing, is also entering the space of education. And so as university as well, we need to adjust to this and tackle the big challenges. First of all, probably this scaling and addressing the global south issue. So as we are starting to run out of time, before also inviting the mayor of Stockholm to join us for launching officially the collaboration, I wanted to ask both of you, any quick takeaway, any kind of, why don't you share with the audience something like, how you see KTH and MIT in 20 years, and what should they be focusing on as we look at the next decades?
Well, because it's my focus at the moment, I think what we should be thinking a lot about is how to operate effectively, how our universities, research universities, can operate effectively in an international environment that is becoming increasingly challenging and volatile and not as friendly to the kind of unrestricted flow of people and ideas and data as it has been, and that has benefited us over the last few decades in our own growth. This is a less friendly world for what universities do. In some ways, it's a more hostile world, and yet we need to keep doing what we're doing. And I think we have to find out ways to operate effectively in this new environment. And I think one of the best things that we can do, in fact, is to work together, and perhaps also for the cities in which we live and work, also to work together to try to create space for the kind of collaboration internationally that is really the essence of what we do and that is so important for us to advance the ball on knowledge and innovation and economic well-being.
Sigbritt?
KTH needs to stay relevant for Sweden and internationally, and we together, all universities around the globe, we need to stand for academic values, because now more than ever people are not relying on scientific values or scientific facts anymore, and that is something that we really should stand up for. And deep knowledge, I would say. And innovation, of course, but deep knowledge we must continue to deliver.
Great, wonderful. Many more themes to discuss. Actually, I was looking at all of you. Feel free to look at some of the comments, many insightful ones in the questions list. But I think, as we wrap up, I'd like to invite Anna, the mayor of Stockholm, so for actually officially launching the collaboration, the KTH MIT Senseable Stockholm Lab. Anna. Yes.
stand? Like.
Well, I think there's a photo being taken, and
I thought you were going to ask us to. We were going to have to sing.
Yes.